What's up guys, welcome to Blake's Garage. Today we're going to be working on the BMW E36. Now I started filming this video the other day and I did it 60 frames per second on my GoPro. It wasn't super sharp, so I wanted to refilm the video on the other side of the car. What we're going to be doing here is the MRT Bumpsteer correction kit. That is this guy right here, this awesome part all the way from Finland. This helps you out with your steering geometry when you've lowered your BMW. It also quickens the steering ratio of the vehicle, along with giving you more steering angle at the same time by relocating the pickup point of the tie rod. See this little hole right here? That is the new pickup point, where this one is basically the original pickup point. Also, it just kind of lowers where the tie rod picks up. Factory, right, this tie rod, we're also going to be installing the MRT tie rods. These have a little bit of bump adjustment as well with the spacers right here, which is pretty dang cool. You can actually change that spacing with the washer right here by moving it to the top, or you know, keeping both at the bottom or both at the top, basically whatever you need to do to get the tie rod to the correct position. The original spot is kind of like right here where this nut would be. And with this, it not only moves it to here, which is the new pickup point, you see that little hole right there, but it also moves it downward. And in moving it downward, that is fixing your bump correction from basically lowering the vehicle, and it straightens out the relationship with the tie rod and the actual power steering rack itself. So these are really cool items. These are sold individually. Also, the other really cool piece of the puzzle is this guy right here. This is where it gets a little bit fancy, and you're gonna need a little bit more high quality tools like a press and stuff like that. This is the outer joint, the outer ball joint on the lower control arm. So we're gonna have to press out the original ball joint on the lower control arm and press this in. But you notice that the hole here is not in the center of this circle. Basically, this is offset, and what it's gonna do is give you a longer lower control arm in essence, and that will actually, you know, give you a little bit more camber in the vehicle. It's also going to give you a larger track width and help out with a little bit more of that steering geometry. This is not that hard to install, but you do need the proper tools. You will need a press, and I'll show you how to use this and get it into the vehicle. This is another one from MRT. These are the adjustable E30, E36 F cabs. If you wanted E46 ones, they also make those too, but you know, those are kind of like a hex pattern here. The control arm is a little bit different, and that's why. But these are fully adjustable, as you can see right here. This unscrews. You can change the Heim joint for, you know, different caster changes on the vehicle and track width changes, which is pretty badass. Just one of the more of those cool items from MRT. Now, one thing I did run into, and I'll let you guys know about this right now, and I'll show you later on in the video. This area here, if you have had previously modified F cabs, like something that was of Delrin nature, something like this, which is what I had on the car before, you may have already grinded down the little nub on the end of your lower control arm. Now, if you did that, you may need a welder, and I say that because you're probably going to need to add some material back. That was the case with mine, because I had to remove material, you know, to get this thing to work, and that's just the differences in different people's machining tolerances. What I've found is MRT has really tight tolerances to the factory stuff, and you know, that's why I'm going to have to add a little bit of metal, grind it down, and get this nice and tight. Take these off, they're 17 mil, get the wheel off. I have extended studs and lugs. You got this little bolt right here. So at first, we need to remove the nut itself. That is a 16 millimeter. So we'll kind of bust that off with an extension. And then we'll sort of leave the nut on the top. You don't want to round this out. Now, you can take this tool. This is a ball joint separator tool. And I want to slide it in here. This tool makes it a lot easier. Now, I like just putting an impact wrench on it, because to tell you the truth, with all the noise, it kind of dampens the loud noise that this thing's gonna make once it busts loose, which is kind of nice actually. It's pretty loud. Not gonna lie, when that thing breaks loose, it's kind of scary. All right, heard that loud bang? That removes it, separates it. And if you had good ball joints, you know, here, It's gonna make it to where you don't mess these up, you know, you don't tear the boot and that sort of thing. So you could reuse them, or, you know, give them to a friend if you need to. So like I said, I took off my inner. So right here, you know, you have your little adjustment point, you have the ball. This is the inner tie rod going into the power steering rack. That is not necessary to take off. However, I did. I just did it because I'm actually replacing the power steering rack with a Z3 rack at the same time. I'll have a video on how to replace your E36 steering rack with a Z3 rack if you're curious as to why I would be doing that. Factory rack is 3 turns lock to lock. That one's anywhere from 2.7. With this kit, it gets down to right around 2.5 lock to lock, which is, it's awesome. I've done it on my E30, that little guy right there, and I absolutely love it. This is one of the favorite mods that I've ever done to any of my BMWs. Well, I don't have that many, but let's just say it is my absolute favorite mod that I did to my E30. Okay, so now let's bust off the coilover. We got a couple bolts to remove here. They're 18 millimeters. We'll pop these off. I'm using a mid torque on this. You could use a stubby Milwaukee, but honestly, these things are torqued on pretty damn good, so I'm going with the mid torque on that. I do highly recommend picking up some of these if you have not done so. It's so awesome to work with these tools. It makes everything so much faster. So put that on the list if you haven't. All right, you can see we busted that little nut off there, and then after that, this whole assembly is going to be sort of loose, right? So it's going to drop down, so be aware of that. You don't want to rip your brake line out or anything like that. I do have longer brake lines because I've done steel braided lines. If you are doing this, I would probably recommend to change to steel braided lines, as you may get a little bit more steering angle from this. Actually, you will get more steering angle depending on how you set it up. I recommend them. All right, this is where we get a little bit of that droop. So I'm going to kind of put this on here. Probably get a zip tie real quick. I kind of got my rotor chilling here now, so we can get this last little part here, which is going to be that lower bolt on ball joint. This is going to be replaced, and it will basically look like this. Okay guys, so it's kind of how we're gonna have it lined up. It's gonna be the most outer area here, and that's how we're gonna line it up. I basically line this up with this angle right here, this kind of the straight angle. But you know, you may want to kind of, you could mark this ahead of time, which might not be a bad idea, just to know your furthest outer point. However, that can kind of change with the geometry of the F cab right here. So, you know, it really all depends on how you dial this in, but I just kind of like to get it to the outermost part of that ball joint area. We can use this tool one more time. Like I said, I like to use the mid torque with this because it goes a little bit faster. So we'll blast this off and make a big pop. Woo! See how scary that is? Dude, hopefully I didn't crack my lens. That actually kind of bent the bolt on there, which is kind of scary. So, let's try that one more time. We'll try that one more time. I gave it a couple more whacks with a mallet this time, so maybe it'll be a little more friendly to me. I don't know, kind of scary last time. Woo! There's that loud pop we were waiting for. And no flying off piece this time, so that's nice. Let her remove that. Like I said, I kind of banged it in that time, if you will. Yep. So, knuckle is just chilling. Look at that, guys. I totally bent the shaft on that ball joint. That was under a lot of pressure. Okay, so the last little part, well actually we got 2 parts left. We got this guy right here, this inner ball joint up on the subframe. So that uses a Allen wrench in it. I want to say it's a 6mm. You're going to actually like put it in, and it will keep the nut from spinning, the little shafts. Just like how this was, you won't be able to see it, but I'll just kind of show you guys. That has an Allen wrench on the top, so you do that, and then you put the wrench around it, and then this doesn't spin. So that's the idea behind that. I think it's 2 17mm, I want to say. A little whack, I don't know. There it goes. That pops off. Okay. You can see I got the Allen just chilling in there. It's not spinning yet, so as soon as it starts to spin, I'll mess with that more. Now, if you were doing this and your power steering is still connected, maybe a bit of a more of a pain, because you'd have a power steering line right here. I actually, like I said, I'm doing my Z3 rack swap, and I'm putting on all the Chase Bay's power steering line stuff and all that, so yeah. Now, you can pound on this with a hammer, you can use a pickle fork, whatever. Just realize when you use a pickle fork, there's a chance you may rip the rubber here. It's actually what I used last time. It worked out good for me. I had a really wide one and it worked fine. But yeah, if you want to pound on this at first, if you have a little bit of room, maybe you can get it busted loose. We got it loose. I don't know. This is why, if you haven't done your control arms, it's probably best to, you know, replace these, because you could rip that inner ball joint. I like slightly sliced mine, which sucks. So I cut mine slightly right there. That's why it's not the best tool for the job, but sometimes it's kind of what you have to do, or you can bang on this a lot and hope you get lucky. So this is the part of the video where you're gonna need a friend with a press, or a press at your house, or whatever. This one's from Harbor Freight, right around 200 something bucks, I think, 200, 250, something like that. Used it quite a few times. It's come in very handy. I gotta press out this joint right here. So this one is actually, here's the one from the other side. It's gonna pop out, boom, just like that. It's gonna be the new MRT part right here. So the black part is gonna be the bottom, which is basically like this, and this part, threaded, comes up to the top. So think of it like this. This is bearing the load. We have a new bolt that goes through here, and the bolt is going to be through there. So it's pressing on this outer ring, this lip here, and that's what is bearing the load weight of your suspension there. So, and then this will kind of go on after the fact. I grabbed a really big socket that this will kind of fit into if I have the threaded piece off. So what you want to be really careful about is when you start to press through on the backside, that this thing has full clearance. You don't want to mess up any of the threads. If this were to come into contact and crunch the threads, it'll really screw it up, and then you're gonna have to do some filing and stuff like that to try to get it fixed. So make sure whatever you're pressing into has enough room, because this is going to poke out of the new control arm quite a bit, and you don't want to damage that. This little die works out to be the perfect size of my old ball joint, and that's what we're going to press through on the new ones. Starting to press this out. See, it's starting to go through already. Perfect. There we go. With this one, what I ended up having to do is throw a pin back through this, since it was such a tight fit, to get it off of the old die. But look at that, thing looks perfect. We got it through. So now this one is gonna come in through the bottom and get pressed into this piece like this. So we'll basically get this all lined up. I'm gonna try to do about the same that I did on the other side. Ease off and take a peek. Gosh, too, so you want to get that right. That's how mine looks. Okay. As far as the MRT logo goes, that's sort of how I lined mine up. All right, guys. So you just want to try to mirror it, get it as close to the outside as you can. Think of what you want here, I guess. It's kind of a weird one to look at, so just do your best to try to get that lined up and do it the same on each side. Now with the Magnus Racing Team stuff, we have the adjustable front lower control arm bushings. These things adjust in. They're actually going to install like this inboard, okay? And then you see where the threaded piece is here, that goes downward, and the two bolts are going up. I'm on the driver's side right now. and it's gonna go like this, so the writing will actually be facing downward. All right, let's go ahead and put these on. Also, this, I welded on it and grinded it down a bit, because like I said before, I just added a little bit of metal. That way, this is a tighter fit. I just didn't want a lot of noise, so I did do that. That's not something you're gonna probably have to do if you have stock arms, but if you have modified yours in the past, you may need to possibly do that to get a tighter fit here. And then we're gonna have quite a bit of a adjustment to play with later on when we get the car aligned. And you don't want to over torque these at all, so I'm gonna go ahead and torque those down to factory spec, and then we'll get back at it. Looks nice under there. So depending on if you guys are putting on new tie rods, I recommend doing the tie rods, you know, especially if your suspension is old. These things are just badass with the Heim joints and everything like that. Very basic and easy to install. Like I was saying on this install, I'm doing a new power steering rack, but Heim ball joints right here, hemispherical ball joints, very nice. And then you'll notice right here, you got this nut, and that is the jam nut right there. So make sure to take that off before threading this on. Like I said, tie rods are pretty easy to install. Obviously, we're gonna have to do a full alignment on the car after this, but we're just gonna put that on there a little bit, and then later on we'll get this installed. If you notice here too, this is slightly offset. They make two different versions. Watch when I turn this around. If you see, MRT logo should kind of be facing forward, and you'll kind of see how this has more material down here at the bottom than it does at the top. That is also to straighten out the rod a little bit, right? You kind of see how it goes dink dink and it's straight like this. That is going to help the geometry a bit too, so you can actually change that. See how now we're pointing downward, now we're kind of in the middle, and we're like that. Basically goes like this to where the most downward part is going to be like that. And then obviously when we put these on, you know, we want to have as much thread in there as we can. Obviously we want our proper alignment as well, but you know, the more threads kind of the better, as that makes it a stronger setup. You don't just want to adjust this guy all the way out and barely have anything going on. You want to adjust the inner threads more. You guys can see there are all the torque specs for everything on this kit. So we're going to go ahead and go through it and start torquing everything down in sequence now that we have those guys, which are these guys right here, installed. Let's go to installing the actual Bumpsteer correction kit. This thing is super clean. I love the setup. If you guys haven't checked out the MRT stuff, I highly recommend it. I think he makes some of the coolest stuff on the market for E30s and E36s. He also does some like DTM arms for E30s and E36s, which are super lightweight and aluminum and really sick racing setup stuff. So yeah, get your eyes on that and check it out. And I'll leave a link to his Instagram down below in the description. I just removed the zip tie, and you'll see there's kind of this conical washer like thing. It has a concavity to it. That was placed in it like this, so the concave part is pushing upwards, meaning that when you torque it down, it'll kind of smash it down. There's also a spacer here that lines up with basically your tie rod here, so either your factory tie rod or your aftermarket tie rod. That thing needs to go there. If that pops out for any reason, like see how it can pop out of there, because those are replaceable, which is very nice, but make sure you don't lose that. And if you see that on the ground, that's what that is. There's also a spacer here. Now, depending on your setup, you're going to use a different spacer, basically depending on the type of knuckle you have on your car. Regular E36 is a 7.5 millimeter like this one right here. We can measure that out. And E36M, so M knuckles are different than regular standard E36 knuckles. You'll actually only use a 1 millimeter spacer. And if you're doing this on an E46, it'll be a 6 millimeter spacer. And that is that guy right there. Now that is when we bolt it onto the knuckle back here. The areas are going to be like here and here, so I'll show you that right now, because the next step is taking this off. Now I'm showing you, he assembles these how they, you know, go onto the car. You have a washer there, you have a polylock nut, and you know, you have a little spacer here, you have a cotter pin, and you have the nut down here. So right now we want to make sure to remove any bump, and then we're basically going to install this guy here, which is the 16mm pin, and then we will put the washer on and the lock nut. Now, he wants us to do this first, as we're basically setting this up as sort of a like almost permanent piece, right? So we're gonna bolt this in here and get this torqued down, and then we're gonna do our final torquing on the bottom nut right here with the cotter pin and all that stuff. So making sure that this is nice and tight. So we'll get that going. We need to tighten this top nut to 100 Newton meters. And as you can see right here, it is tapered. So when it goes up in here, it's gonna get nice and tight. So we'll get that to 100 Newton meters. Just to speed it up, I'm gonna get this kind of tight with the impact. You're gonna wanna use a 13mm 12 point on the bottom here. And then we can kind of get that tight. All right, so I just did that to get it tight. Now I'm gonna go ahead and go back and torque it to 100 Newton meters. I'm gonna go ahead and put the cotter pin back in here so I don't lose it. Okay, I'm putting a wrench on a lug nut on the back side of this so that I can kind of apply pressure downward while pulling upward. So this is not the easiest thing to torque while it's not connected. This is kind of the setup I recommend if you have a, I don't know, hopefully I'm not bending that. Let me tighten this up a little more. All right, got that torqued to 100 Newton meters. Kind of interesting to do like that, but hey, that's kind of a cheater method. See, I had studs. I just kind of used it like this to kind of keep it steady. Probably should have used a breaker bar, but whatever, that's my cheap torque wrench. This is my good Mac torque wrench. Anyways, just put it on there. Now we're good. You can see that. I think it's a really good idea to possibly use some of this VisiTorque when you're doing this. Not only does it help for reference in the future, but it's gonna let you know if your bolt has moved on you, right? So it's just a very simple way to see if it has moved on you at all by putting it on the thread and the nut. If it slips or moves any, you will know, and then you can just kind of see it because it's not in line, and then you know you need to nut and bolt check that and retorque it down. If you're doing the MRT style tie rods, what you're going to notice here is a couple spacers. You can actually move these to the bottom or to the top, and that is going to correct the geometry even more for bump steer. So because I have this bump steer correction and we've already kicked this down quite a bit, I think I'm going to take these two spacers and move those down to the bottom because I think this will be enough for the bump steer correction. If not, we can move these around in the future. I guess I would have to slide. No, I could just take this nut off and just change those around, but we need to tighten this guy down first before we install this piece onto the knuckle, as this part here for the tie rod is basically going to be blocked by this part of the knuckle. The way that this thing works is not only by moving down your pickup point for your tie rod, basically moving it from here, right, which is actually here, and then moving it inboard to here, changing the speed and the angle that you're able to get with your wheel. So you'll actually gain more angle, which is good or bad. If you're already rubbing, you may need to put spacers in the steering rack, like I was saying, to limit how much steering angle you're gonna have, because you don't want it to rub. That can, you know, cause issues, but that all depends on the offsets of your wheels. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, is the relocation is quickening the steering. I absolutely love the way it feels. It makes these things feel so absolutely sporty with the BMWs. I mean, BMWs are already great, but when you quicken up the steering, oh my God, it's awesome. We put the convex washer, convex meaning like this. If it was concave, it would be like this, like a scoop. Convex is like this, concave is like this, caving in, convexing out. So we put that in there, and now we got to tighten this down to 40 Newton meters on this tie rod end right here. As you can see, I moved the spacer pieces here as well. These pieces I moved from up top to down here. We want to obviously keep the washer like how it is. So nut, washer, spacer, right? Bolt, washer, washer on the bottom. This does not have any Ackerman adjustment on the tie rod like some of the older versions. So I think version 2 had an Ackerman adjustment. This one, the Ackerman's already dialed in for you. But right now we want to slip this over this bolt right here like this. It should slip over fairly easily, just like that. As we can see now, we have that bolt sticking out. Now this is going to go to here, right, like that. And we also got to get this bolt into the bottom area, but So that is this stack here, washer on the bottom, then spacer here, then washer, then lock nut. Notice, what you're gonna notice in this spacer too, there is this little part where it's dimpled that is going to come off and slide into the knuckle. So it does slot into the knuckle and gets its orientation like that. Goes like this, and this guy goes like this. So we'll tighten this up in a second here. If you see this area right here, if you have an E36 M or E30 and you're possibly hitting the knuckle right here, when this gets squeezed down, you are going to need to chop the top of this bolt right here, just kind of shave it down with a grinder. But I think we're going to be cool here, and then we'll move on to this next part over here. So, semi-tighten this down. Just get it snug, don't tighten it all the way. We want it sort of loose because there's a bit of play here in this little area here, and we got to get this guy on, right? So we still have to shove this on here, and then we have a nut on the bottom. So we have to shove this now into here and pick this all up and hopefully not drop that piece in the process. Then we can work on that bottom half. Oh man, it is coming together. Look at that, guys. That is looking freaking sweet. You can see this right here. Now we got to get our little nut down there. So just put this on. We are going to torque this ARP nut down to 85 Newton meters. And then we can throw, boom, our cotter pin in there. Now we can get this final M12 right here torqued down. That is a 19 millimeter nut on there, and that is going to go down to 100 Newton meters. You're going to notice there's an Allen, and that is a 10 millimeter Allen in the bottom. So to get that tightened up, that's what we're going to do. Woo! I can actually go ahead and reinstall the strut. The one thing that I'm going to need to do after that is obviously get a alignment. Try to get this back into its place. After all of the torquing procedure is done, you can go ahead and just reinstall your coilover with the 2 bolts on the lower knuckle and then the 1 on the upper, and then pretty much your install is finished up for this stuff. You're obviously going to want to get the car aligned, especially if you did new tie rod ends, but even if you didn't, it's probably going to tow out the car a little bit, as those tie rods are going to be just a bit longer due to the fact that you've changed the pickup point with the geometry of the suspension. So definitely make sure to do that. One thing I did want to tell you guys, literally lock to lock now is just barely over 2 turns, which is insane. I can't wait to drive the car. I think it's like 2.1 turns lock to lock, so full right to full left. And the car is slightly rubbing the inside of the wheel, so technically I do need to put some sort of stop so that the inside of the front wheel won't rub on the frame rail. Now if you have a different offset wheel or something like that, or a skinnier wheel, you probably won't have as much issue as I do. I have a 5 millimeter spacer on the 17 by 9.5 plus 35, so I guess that's what, like plus 30 is the ET on these wheels. And then I am running 255/40 R17s, which is pretty much the fattest setup you can run on one of these cars stock without, you know, chopping up the fender wells or doing any of that stuff. And the car is dumped with about negative, it's got about negative 3 to 3.5 degrees of negative camber up front. So can't wait to get an alignment on the car and really drive this thing. And then I'll show you guys how it feels on the road with a little bit of road testing.